All right. All right. What's up, everyone? We're back for another week of the foundational pillars of leadership. We got week 4, so we've been chipping away. We've hit communication, team building, adaptability, and now we're starting off with delegation for this week. So once again, I'm Jeff. I'm the founder of Next Level Solutions, and one of the reasons I built this company is, I believe that a lot of great leadership and executive level leadership is built upon just simple foundational pillars, that we're looking to teach in this course. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to kick off delegation. So here we go. So delegation. Basically, what we're looking to talk about this week is empower your team and steps to proper delegation. So we believe that, one of the bigger things and the reasons why empowering your team is so important is, as a leader, you're going to have a lot of tasks and you can't be able to handle it all. Realistically, you shouldn't be expected to. So with that being said, when you empower your team, there's kind of an art or a science behind where empowering your team means empowering your team, not to cross the line to micromanage. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then there's about 8 steps that we believe that is extremely important to follow and understand in order to do proper delegation, which also empowers your team in the proper way. So delegation itself. So as a leader, you can't do everything yourself, as I mentioned, right? Delegating tasks and responsibilities to your team members is essential for managing you and your team's workload. You can't expect yourself, you can't expect anyone else, one person, 2 people, to handle it all. Everyone has to share the workload, and it has to be delegated based on people's strengths and weaknesses. So, tapping into the previous weeks of adaptability and team building, much of what delegation kind of relies on is understanding each team member's strengths and weaknesses, and assigning a task accordingly. A lot of, being able to pass on the tasks and the workload off of yourself onto your team. It allows that proper understanding is going to allow your team to run efficiently because you're going to have the ability to delegate the proper tasks to the right person, knowing that it's going to be done. So empowering your team. So this is a key takeaway. So if you guys are taking notes live in class or listening after the fact, this is one of your note-taking points that I want to make sure that you guys understand. So when you delegate, you're empowering your team to make a decision, and you're going to support them with that. It requires trust. If you're going to delegate, you must trust the team to follow through. This is huge because there's a certain aspect in, over time, you're going to be able to delegate large tasks. You're probably going to start off with small tasks, depending on the size of your team. If you have more experienced people versus, more new team members or inexperienced people based on, how you run things, experience within the company, industry experience, there's a lot of different variables. But it's also going to allow you to build certain levels of trust at a certain speed. But at the end of the day, regardless of how small or large the task is, you need to, or delegating requires you to have trust, right, in your team to follow through. There's a way to do this too that does not cross the line of micromanaging, which is proper checks and balances to ensure they're on track. So if you give a task or responsibility to one of your team members, allowing them to follow through with the task and empowering them to think on their own, make their decisions, and to have them understand that you support them in doing so, you can ensure that they're on the right track by providing checks and balances. And an example of this is, Andrew, you're on here, right? So if we work together and I'm like, hey, Andrew, I need you to follow through with this task and make sure that, the deliverable is met by, next month, by the end of July. Regardless of whether he's new or he's very experienced in the industry, an experienced team member, it's probably a good thing to have check-ins, maybe have a weekly check-in with him to start. And if he's, like I said, a newer team member, maybe you have weekly check-ins or maybe even semi-weekly check-ins to start, and then it moves to weekly to ensure that he's on the right track. He has confidence to know that you're there to support him. He's empowered to make these decisions on his own, but also knows that you're not going to kind of just leave him out there to dry. On the other hand, if you have a more experienced, maybe an experienced team member, maybe you use weekly check-ins to start because he already kind of has a little bit of groove within the team or within how the industry runs, how the company runs, how the team runs. And then you move to bi-weekly, or if it's a multi-month program, maybe it goes from weekly to bi-weekly to monthly, depending on the progress, the severity, or maybe it goes the other direction. It's, you start off with bi-weekly, and then as the deadline approaches or more critical points are established, you move to weekly check-ins. Either one of those are fine. But what we don't want to do is we do not want to micromanage. And there's a fine line there. If you're going to empower a team or empower a team member to assist or take the lead, more importantly, on one of your tasks and responsibilities, you have to let them do it. And you have to let them think for themselves, develop skills, trust them that they're going to do things their way, but to get to the right answer. Everyone's going to think a little bit differently, prioritize things differently, understand how they do things differently. And you need to trust that the work's going to be done. And one of the ways that you can do that, again, is by providing proper checks and balances, but you don't want to cross the line of micromanaging. And when I say micromanage, it's more of you're hovering over them. They know that they're hovering over them. If you feel like you're flirting the line, you probably have already crossed it, to be honest with you. Just take a step back and let them take a chance to, solve a problem, give an update. If they're way off the ball, all you got to do is reset the expectations, right? And this goes into the final bullet. If you're going to give someone on your team a task, let them do it. Give them an opportunity to learn and figure out for themselves, fix the problems later. Not everyone has to be perfect the first time around, especially depending on the industry, but, let them figure out how you work as well as a leader, what your expectations are. Maybe they were off the mark. Give them an opportunity to fix the problems later. This is a perfect opportunity for you as well, where you can learn on where the gaps are in communication and how you didn't explain things, whether they didn't understand it, whether you as a leader explained it incorrectly for them to understand. There's a learning point on both sides. So when you give someone a task, don't necessarily just, even if you did all the things correctly, you don't necessarily are solely out of responsibility on this. When you empower someone to do a task, let them do it. And if they do it incorrectly or don't provide the perfect answer that you want first time around, that's okay. It's an opportunity for you to take a step back and understand where the communication gaps are for you as a leader in this instance, fix them. And then that way you're just a stronger leader in regards to setting expectations later on. Hey, Murillo. I know you just jumped on, but this is, you jumped on at the perfect time. We're just talking about empowering your team, and we went through this. This is one of the key takeaways for this week. We can go through this at a later date, and I can give you the video to catch up on what you missed. But Andrew, do you have any questions? I'm going to pause here before we move forward. Do you have any thoughts, comments, questions on this at all?
No, good on my side. I think it's like I think we talked about it maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, just like the importance of the communication aspect of it, versus micromanaging, expectations. And so yeah, I think that fits in well here.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of a good point, right? And let's see if I can do this. Yeah, here we go. This is why communication in here is the center pillar. Everything we've talked about up until this point has required proper communication. This is the key aspect to everything as a leader. And it doesn't matter what it is in regards to simple timelines, simple task organization, setup. Even if by setting up a task organization or a team organization, an organizational chart, that's a form of communication. You're laying, and if it's a little bit unclear on what your expectations are, their roles and responsibilities, that's a lack of communication, even if it's in visual form. So this is why we provide this pillar, communication, as the center pillar and also the biggest pillar, because it goes into every single other one of the pillars that we talk about. So that's a great point, Andrew.
I got a question, and
Yes, Murillo.
I think that's not a, I think it's a challenge for me. I had to figure out and still do sometimes communicating to me or the way I want to communicate sometimes doesn't get received the way people need to be communicated. And I think that's one of my biggest challenges, that sometimes I'm sending out an email or a Slack about something when that's not the appropriate channel to communicate. It's something that needs to be talked through or have a more in-depth discussion. And because I'm trying to get things done, happen to be the boss, I feel like I can just send somebody a short email and they know what to do. And in reality, that was just a bad way to do it. So that's something that I have to be really conscientious, because I'm always screwing this up.
I think it, based on your position and knowing your background a little bit, it's okay to do what you thought in regards to sending out an email, because you can't be constantly in personal communications. I think just in general, you know, there needs to be different levels of communications for different times, right? And we kind of went through this a little bit with a previous task, but I'm glad you brought it up for a review. You know, there's going to be certain types of communications for certain times to certain people, right? Whether you're communicating above, you're communicating below, you're communicating parallel, all of which are internal, or if you communicate external, depending on what you're communicating and who you're communicating it to will kind of dictate how you communicate it. But what I will say is, regardless, you can always do this, Murillo, is where you can kind of set the tone or the expectation, maybe a high level, or just send your memo out and then set an expectation at the bottom where it says, hey, have the expectation that we'll have a follow-up conversation on this to provide more detail. That kind of gets that person in the head. We'll start thinking about this at a high level, but know that we're going to have to take a deeper dive on this later on. You know, something like that, where you can do those things, especially in your position, but you have the ability also to follow up at the time that you need to, and you don't need to provide an elongated memo or an elongated email just to get everything done. We've talked about communication being clear and concise. Do that in those emails, and then maybe do that in the email and attach it to a meeting invite. That way they have that agenda and what they're going to talk about, and they know they have a follow-up meeting with you to discuss further detail one-on-one later in the week or the following week. So there's different ways to do about it. I definitely wouldn't try to elongate anything. I would just set the expectation that there's more to come, and get the high level, make it clear and concise. And one of the techniques that we talked about in the first class with communication was the 5 W's, you know, who, what, where, when, and why, and then how. Obviously, if you at least provide whoever you're talking to those points, some of those points, they may not all be relevant within one communication setting or communication memo, but if you get them the high level that they need, they'll at least understand what those expectations are. And then you can follow up with further detail. So that's a great point, though, because every person you talk to, internal versus external, and who they are, is going to potentially need a different level of communication. So great point. Steps to proper delegation. So this is the other big takeaway for this week, right? So if you're going to properly delegate to someone, what you definitely don't want to do, even before we go into what you should do, what you don't want to do is drop something on their desk, give them a timeline, and be like, I expect this to get done. There's going to be way too many questions. They're going to interpret things on their own, which can be a good thing because maybe you want their perspective in problem solving, but they're also going to interpret, you know, potentially what your expectations are. And that may not be what's good or bad. If you have specific expectations, you need to set those when you properly delegate. Because usually what's going to happen is you're going to be delegating on behalf of a program, on behalf of a company, to make sure that there's strategic alignment, there's tactical or operational alignment, to, you know, whatever you guys are trying to accomplish, to bigger goals, right? So you have to set the expectation early on. And by not doing that, there could be some room for error, and you're going to have to close a much bigger gap in the beginning instead of setting clear expectations. So we know that's point 4, but that's kind of the one thing you don't want to do. Don't go up and just, I expected you to do this, even if it's someone that's you've been working with on the same program. They know you, you know them. Take the time to baseline, right? We've always talked about in proper communication how to baseline everyone, regardless. And I'll use my military example, regardless of the level of the courses that we would do, we would always have at least a 1 slide refresh baseline of all the basic stuff that we're going to review. And then you build off of that. So setting the expectation can be as simple as that. Hey, this is what we've gone through. This is where we should be at this point in time. This is where I need you to go. This is the next level. This is the next level of the program, the task, the responsibility, the next level of how this is going to tie to business strategy. There's different ways you can phrase it, but baselining or setting an expectation, however you want, should be the first thing, or one of the most important things, not necessarily the first. One of the most important things you need to do before passing it off and just dumping it on someone, because that way, that at least they'll understand what you expect from them. So the proper way to do this, right? Clearly define the task. Now, that may seem self-explanatory, but I guarantee people don't take a deeper dive into the task itself to truly understand what is needed to be done. If you write the task on a whiteboard and you do the 5 whys on why this needs to happen, why, all the way down, or even how, maybe 2 whys and a how, you can break it down to the level of detail that you want. But a 5 why method is a great way to understanding root cause. It also is a great way to understanding how you're going to solve these types of problems or how you're going to define a task. Put it on a whiteboard and break down what actually needs to be done. Do a root cause analysis. Take a deeper dive into it. Understand the impact of the task in the short term and the long term. Okay. It is your responsibility as a leader, if you're going to dictate that, what the clear effects are and what it means to both internal and external. It may not be as deep. Not every task is going to be as deep, but it's your responsibility to understand what that task really means to this person that you hand off, you as a leader, to how it impacts the company, etc. After understanding what the task requires, you have to select the right person for the job. And that goes back to what we mentioned earlier with understanding the strengths and weaknesses of that person and how they fit into your team. You don't want to put the wrong task in front of the wrong person, or the right task in front of the wrong person, if I should say it that way. Jim Collins said, as we talked last week, get the right people on the bus, get them on the right seats, and then you can drive the bus to the location. Well, the same thing. Don't put the wrong people in the wrong seat. Don't let them drive the bus to the wrong location. Define the task, define the route in this regards, and give them a clear understanding of what they need to do and hand it to the right person. Provide proper instructions. So 3 and 4, provide proper instruction and setting expectations, are kind of blended, but it's kind of basically, what you need accomplished, by when, and how you would like it done. If there's a specific way, if you're going to represent, and this kind of goes to, for example, during communication, as we communicated up, if you're going to speak to executives, you need to understand how the executive is or how they like their information. If you don't get a chance, get at least an understanding of clear and concise and high level expectations of what executives like. So provide that instruction to them and who they're going to be reporting this to, who's going to see this. Then set the expectations of when this needs to be accomplished. You're going to be setting weekly check-ins, as we mentioned, to make sure that you're on progress. We want a first draft in 2 weeks. The final revision needs to be done in 4, and we're going to have a presentation in 5. Setting those types of expectations and instructions up allows them to understand what they clearly need to do and helps them clearly understand what they need to do. Provide support and resources. This goes back to a few slides earlier where we said when you provide a task, you're empowering them to use their skills to complete this task. Let them do it. That goes right into trust and empower. Provide them the necessary resources, which is access to you, access to other people, maybe put a team-wide blast out that say like, hey, Jeff's working on this. He may have to reach out to you guys. provide that communication and set him up for success. Also trust and empower that he's going to do this job and use his skills. Like we mentioned, don't flirt the line with micromanaging. If you feel like you're flirting it, you've already passed it. Empower him to do it. Trust him. Provide the proper checks and balances that allow him to come back to you and fix any problems, to let him know that you're there for him. That kind of blends between both support and resources, as well as trust and empower. And then it also bleeds into monitor progress with those check-ins, you know? And then finally, review and learn. So that goes back to the final bullet on the empower slide. After everything's completed, or after every check-in, you know, you're going to have an opportunity not only to review his work, understand how he works, understand how he thinks, understand how he applies his skills, but also you get a chance to understand, did you properly communicate everything you did up front? Were there gaps? What didn't he understand? How are you going to be able to better communicate a task like this in the future? How are you going to be able to better communicate a task like this to him in the future specifically? There's an opportunity to review and learn at the end of every single situation. So those are the key 8 steps for proper delegation that we've laid out, that regardless of the size of the task, the role or the responsibility of your team, if you do these 8 steps, you'll always have proper delegation, and the roles and responsibilities will be clearly defined, and the task will be done by the right person. So this slide here, and I'll pause there, actually. We'll go back. Does anybody have any questions in regards to the steps to proper delegation? That's another key note-taking takeaway. So silence. Okay. Silence is golden. This is just a simple matrix that ties both the delegation and a little bit of prioritization, right? Very, very simple things. I'm a big proponent of simple solutions to complex problems. There's many different ways to evaluate different issues out there, such as Pareto charts and graph analysis. And, you know, depending on the complexity of the problem, maybe you need a complex solution. But I'll tell you right now, in regards to prioritization, in regards to understanding what tasks you need to handle now, as well as which ones you can delegate, there's a very, very simple formula that you can use right here. So if it's urgent and important, that means you should probably take the lead on it and get it done immediately. If it's important but less urgent, you probably need to take the lead on it, but you can schedule it for later. If it's urgent but not as important, it's a great opportunity to delegate that to a team member and give them the opportunity to show what they're worth, provide their skills, provide their unique problem-solving solutions to you. It's a great way to evaluate your team members by delegating tasks to understand what they can do, what they're capable of, and how they think. And then for the less important and less urgent, this says delete. I would say never delete a task, but it's definitely a tertiary type task. You know, you have the other 3 in front of them, take care of those, and then either remove it or tackle it at a much later date. So.
Hey, Jeff, this slide's messy with my head a little bit.
Yeah.
Just because I'm so used to this, but I usually get urgent and not urgent. But you put the word less urgent, and it kind of is like it changes the dynamics a little bit for me. So I'm trying to, you know, because not urgent, it means, okay, you know, I don't have to worry about it. It's not that, but less urgent, it says it's still somewhat urgent. It's not as urgent as the other guy. So I'm trying to kind of readjust some kind of a thinking here, because I'm trying to figure out, okay, it's easier for me to think of not urgent as not important, because a lot of times, you know, it's important and not important, urgent, not urgent. But less urgent, it's a little more nuanced. So I'm just trying to kind of figure this out. I think it's really great use of something people probably have seen before, but you change certain words, it gets new meaning for them.
Yeah, great point. And I think probably each person in their mind is going to have a better understanding of what urgent, not urgent, and even less urgent means. The reason why I use less instead of not is when you draw a line that something is not urgent, you almost start to, like you said, you draw it as it's very black and white. When, you know, in a dynamic environment of business, you can't just shuffle it away and hope it never comes back. It's still going to be there, but it's going to be second priority to the urgent and important. So I think, to me, and again, this may be just the way I think, when it's less urgent or less important, it's not saying that it's not, it just does not beat the priority of urgent and important, which is why that's coded red. If it's not immediate, it kind of falls into the blue or the green section. But it still needs to get done. I think to your point, when you label something as not urgent, it's not important, and it can be forgotten or dropped, and you don't want to have that type, or you don't want to lose that vision or that perspective on something, that task that could potentially change and become important or urgent based on the different scenarios that change around you. So it's kind of like
that. I just, it's just nice that sometimes changing one word can stop people from, glaring through something that they think they know, and cause them to re-examine what it really means, as opposed to, oh, I thought I know what this means. So no, not really. You really don't know. This is not the same thing. So, but thank you. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point too. And I think what we're kind of saying the same thing, where we don't want people to overlook or, pass that on. We want them to take the opportunity, even if it's at a later date, to make sure that gets prioritized at some point, falls into a category, and that solution still gets solved. So for thoughts and questions. So this is exactly what it sounds. And also, Murillo, since it's the first week you're here, this is kind of our hot seat coaching opportunity. And what that means is it gives an opportunity for anyone that's here live to submit any questions, comments, or concerns that they have about their business, their actual business, and something that either me and Chris or Brian, who aren't here this week, but we all get to give different perspectives on how to potentially solve your problem, and something that you can take away actionable tonight and implement tomorrow. So if you have something like that, that's great. If not, any questions, comments in general, more than welcome.
Well, as I would, I know it was only part of this, but my mind just works really fast sometimes. But I think that, how would you handle communication patterns that have been established, that they work, let's say 70% of the time? It's not broken and it's not terrible, it works, but there is a much better way to optimize them to get better. But the culture has put these in place for a long time, and it may be months or years, and that you want to somehow make a change. How do you do that without either breaking it, or, I don't know if the question is clear enough, but it's the idea sometimes you communicate in certain ways and you get lazy, you just kind of like, you understand what people, you think they understand you, and so you don't go as diligent as setting up deadlines as clearly, or setting up expectations, or, okay, I need this done, this project needs to be done for XYZ, especially when it's an internal project. External projects are easier because you have a client deadline and you're trying to work with clients. So, a lot of times it's preset. So it's just like a race, or just so we know how to do this. But when it's something you're trying to do internally, which is part of the important, but not urgent, but is the part of that quadrant that can potentially give the company the biggest opportunity, because it's something they can do, and you don't have all these processes in place, how do you go about implementing them without creating chaos and shock?
Yep. Two things pop into my mind immediately. One, I'm going to go with developing a process. Understand what gaps they are. And what I mean by that is you don't have to reinvent the wheel for this. These can be very, very simple things. So if you're talking about how you want people to communicate, or how you want to be received, your communication can be received, an easy way to do it is exactly what I mentioned before, which is in your memos, you always provide some form of the 5 whys, any combination based on what you're trying to communicate. Like if you're trying to communicate, we have a new customer, there's a new program, there's a new opportunity, you can set expectations on why it's important to the company, when it's supposed to be completed, who's taking the lead on it, what needs to happen in order for this, what list of actions in order needs to be accomplished at this point in time. And you can kind of start to, and I would say even before doing that, if you want to communicate change, communicate the change is potentially coming, and communicate that, hey, you know, for any internal memos that provide communication in regards to deadlines, I need you to provide the 5 W's in regards to this, or at least as many of them that are applicable. And you can do that. There's nothing wrong. And that's a simple process that gets everyone on the same page. Because if you communicate an email to me that provides that information, at least the 5 whys, I know those wave tops and I know what needs to be done. You know, you could say nothing else in a memo, which I don't recommend, but I would say, you know, if you provide those 5 whys at a very, very base minimum, it tells the story. And
you know what, you're right. But the problem is not the team. I think that the problem is the leader, whatever, if you're the manager or the business owner or the division leader. In this case, I am the issue for not setting up the structure. So, you know, I want the team to follow a structure that I haven't created. And that sometimes is where the problem is. If when you want to operate at a certain level, there is no standard operating procedure that people go, okay, this is the play we're going after. So I know that this happens, or this is what I want. And I think that I need to do that. I have just done something this may actually help with this part. I've set up ChatGTP to become 2 different personas. One of them is my personal assistant. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling that persona all the things that I do and who I think. And then I can actually now create the 5 W's and tell then and say, and once I tell it what the 5 W's are and what they mean, next time I can just go in and say, hey, create a memo with the 5 W's about this task.
Bingo.
And it will create, and if there's something missing, I get prompted to be, you know, to that way I don't have to rethink about all this time. So it's already training, and that's a really great way to use a virtual assistant for that type of task.
And what I would also say is if you as you start to implement this in your own culture and it starts to develop and you set the expectation, you can simply send an email out if you need a status update. Hey, can you give me the 5 whys on this customer or the customer project? And that person should be able to provide that to you, and you should know what's going on. And that is something that, you know, will take a little bit of time to get acclimated to the team. But once they do, it's a fast and effective way of communicating for everyone to understand what needs to be done and what they're trying to communicate. It's awesome.
Good. That's good insight.
And then the additional, that's obviously a little bit more, that was a very streamlined, clear and concise communication. We used to do that a lot. If we would ever, you know, go on missions, and the bare minimum form of we would build massive operation orders based off the 5 W's. We would also provide 5 W's if we were going off base just for a half hour, just to provide clear and concise communication to understand who's going where, with who, when, you know, all that stuff. Another way to look at this internally, this is more of an internal concept. If you create a board that has visual representation of where the status is for your programs and projects or your customers, this follows a little bit more of the Lean Six Sigma guidelines, which is visual representation, right? And a very simple concept, green, yellow, red. You can track a program, you can track the progress of one of your projects by simple labeling it green, yellow, red, and having milestones set up. And if you provide this as a visual board inside your office, so people walk in and they're empowered to go up and change it. So if they change, you know, a red note to a yellow note, they have to write why this changed, you know, from yellow. And then you can have your sync meetings on it for further explanation. But the minute you walk into the office, everyone should be on the same page, just from a very simple red, yellow, green, with a brief explanation of why on where everything sits. That's important to the company. That's
how would you do that on a virtual team?
So one of the things we use Smartsheet. At Juniper we do, and then there's a specific column, like you can use a columns to, excuse me, it's another form of a spreadsheet, but it's a Smartsheet, and then you can list all the different programs, you can list due dates, people who are assigned to those, and then comments. And then you can list create a column inside of that literally labels the program red, yellow, green. And then whoever goes in to change that, basically who has administrative rights, should be, obviously decision makers, and then the program lead. They can go in and provide comments and say, hey, this program got moved from yellow to green, or, they have a date stamp, 6/27/23, moved from yellow to green because we passed this milestone of blank, period. That's it. Or vice versa. Hey, this program got moved back to yellow from green because the milestone got delayed by 2 weeks because of the customer's delay of providing the information that we needed. We are taking action to follow up with the customer to not lose any further time, period. And you can label each of those. And if you want to take a deeper dive into that, I can show you how to set it up. But those are things that you can just have and provide access to your team, and they can go in and change.
We use Maven Link, which I think has that functionality in it, and I think that they're able to color code as well. So I think we could implement that if it's not already part of the program.
Yep. And it's a great way, like everyone should be able to see that, go in and change it, who are at least are a part of the program. The key part is giving the comments as to why things change and date stamps. And then it's a great way to visually understand what's going on in your company.
Good.
Andrew, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I think like we use obviously something similar. We use Monday.com, which is probably another competitor, but pretty much the same thing. But no, yeah, all good on my side.
Okay. Well, awesome. Thank you guys very much. That is pretty much everything for tonight. If you guys, one last chance for questions, comments, concerns. Okay. Thank you guys. Appreciate another successful week. Week 4 down, delegation. Looking forward to week 5 next week. Actually, next week's 4th of July. So for you guys listening, and for you guys listening later, and guys on, we're going to skip next week, 4th of July. We'll be back the following week on the 9th, I believe it is. So, or the 11th,
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You guys have a good day.
See you.
Thanks.